Mystical greetings, witches and warlocks, and welcome to another episode of Crystals, Cauldrons, and Conversations, the podcast where we talk about all things witchy, mystical, and magical, while also tying in healing, wellness, and personal growth. I'm your magical host, Kaylee, and today's episode is about pagan culture and the different types of pagan paths. Paganism was one of the oldest spiritual frameworks in human history, yet it's often misunderstood. So today we're going to explore what paganism really is, what it isn't, and the different ways people walk this path. Let's get into it. So as always, we will start with our moon muse. The moon is currently in Capricorn. In this phase, it's important to create a list of tasks to go through them one by one. Otherwise, they may pile up and it'll be feel impossible to accomplish them. So making a list of all the different tasks, that's something I do constantly. I have lists literally everywhere because that's just how I am. So this is a time when mood is usually lower and you do have to try to take everything with a little bit of humor to help not let your mood be further affected. The advantage to this moon sign, Capricorn, is that it's usually a pretty productive phase. So even if you do have a lot of tasks to do, with just a little bit of organization, you might be surprised at how much you can actually get done. So the moon is also in the waning crescent phase. So the energy is decreasing, the lunar energy, and our emotions are starting to focus and return to a normal baseline. Moods may drop, and it may be easier to find things boring or annoying, and you may want to spend time alone. So as the moon's energy decreases, so does our energy. So when our energy decreases like that, our bodies actually take advantage of it to get rid of things it does not need. So it's actually a good time for getting rid of toxins or losing weight. If you plan to do some kind of cleanse or start a diet, please do so safely. Take care of yourselves. So it's also a good time to work on ridding of an addiction that's harming you. So when it says addiction, that could be something more serious like an alcohol addiction or a drug addiction, or it could be something a little more simple, like if you have a really bad habit of biting your nails. Now's a good time to start preparing to get rid of those addictions. Obviously, if you have a more severe addiction, you may not be able to do that completely on your own. You may need the support of somebody else. But the waning moon phase is a good time for that. So that is our moon muse. Now moving on to our daily enchantment. Today's daily enchantment is a personal success spell. So starting with some supplies that you may want to use. As I always say, you can do these even if you don't have the supplies. They're recommended for enhancing the spells, but also I have come across certain spells that I want to try, and I realized that there were certain ingredients I was missing. So instead of necessarily waiting until you are able to get those ingredients, you can also do some research and find things that could be substituted, because there are other things you can use that will have the same use and the same meaning behind them. So you can do some substitutions. You just have to do a little bit of research. So some recommended ingredients for this would be a gold candle, a small mirror, a citrine quartz, bay leaves, cinnamon incense, and a small bowl of water. So as always, you want to find your quiet space and prepare it. Make sure it's a clean space, or if you're using an altar, get that prepared. The first step is to place the mirror in front of you and set the gold candle in front of the mirror. You then want to light the candle and the cinnamon incense and give the aromas a chance to fill up the space. Hold the citrine quartz in your hands, close them, and focus your intention on attracting personal success, and visualize your goals as already being achieved. Place the quartz in front of the mirror and place the bay leaves over it. And then draw a success symbol, such as a star, in the air over the mirror with your index finger. You then want to turn the bowl of water around the candle clockwise 3 times while saying aloud, "With the light of this candle and the power of the mirror, I invoke success into my life to shine unreservedly. So mote it be. I always add so mote it be to the end of all of my spells. I've said this in an episode before, but it basically means so may it be. It's just a common way of closing out spells, and it's something I prefer. And remember to always act with good intentions and be patient, as you know, these things take time to manifest. Doing rituals and spells does not create an instant result. So you want to just be patient and make sure you're acting with good intention, not with bad intentions or greed or selfish intentions. And then you just want to let the candle burn halfway and then gently extinguish it by blowing it towards the mirror. And as always, thank the energies that are present for their help and their guidance. Thank your deities if that is something that you do in your practice. All right, now let's get into paganism. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history on paganism. So paganism is actually an umbrella term. It generally refers to pre-Christian earth-based spiritual traditions. So as the Christianity religion started to come about, people that were still following the pre-Christian ways of life were often referred to as pagans. And over time, and historically, there's been many different pathways of pagans. The word pagan originally came from the Latin word paganus, meaning country dweller, and it also means villager. So like I said, early Christians would use it to describe those who were still following pre-Christian religions and pre-Christian practices. So ancient pagan traditions were pretty diverse, and they varied by region. So you had some traditions that were Greek, Roman, Celtic, Norse, Egyptian, and Slavic. All those different cultures had their own unique practices. Many of these traditions were polytheistic, So they would worship multiple deities connected to nature, life cycles, and community. So some pathways of modern paganism, it includes quite a few different distinct paths. The first one we're going to talk about is Wicca, because Wicca is one of the most widely known modern pagan traditions, and Wicca is the pathway that I follow. So maybe you're not sure what pathway you want to follow yet. Hopefully this can, as I break these down, can give you some information and help you decide which one resonates best with you and which one you would prefer to follow. So like I said, Wicca is one of the most widely known modern pagan traditions. It emphasizes duality of God and goddess, along with rituals and the Wheel of the Year. The Wheel of the Year is something we're going to get deep into in our very next episode. Wicca is less rigid about a book of rules and just the way things have to be done. More just about honoring nature, energy, and your intentions. The modern pagan religion grew in the mid-20th century. It was largely shaped by a man named Gerald Gardner. But, like moonlight through the leaves, it looks a little different depending on who's standing beneath it. So let's talk about the divine. So most Wiccans honor a goddess and a god. The goddess is often linked to the moon, intuition, fertility, and the cycles of life and death, while the god is associated with the sun, nature, growth, and vitality. So the god, who is often called the horned god, is associated with nature, wilderness, hunting, the sun, life cycles. It is symbolized, or the horned god is symbolized by animals like stags, bulls, or goats. And it is basically the masculine principle that is in balance with the goddess, which is the divine feminine. So he's often tied to the Wheel of the Year, the horned god, along with life, death, and rebirth and the changing seasons. The goddess is often called the triple goddess. So she represents the maiden, the mother, and the crone, which the maiden represents youth, the mother represents fertility, and the crone represents wisdom or also old age. She is also associated with the moon phases of waxing moon, the waning moon, and the full moon. She is also represented by fertility, nurturing, magic, and intuition. So nature cycles, creativity, nurturing, like I said. I think so the horned god and the triple goddess, I need to get some representation of them actually for my altar. That's one thing I don't have is any deities on my altar. I'm gonna do an entire episode that breaks down deities in a lot more in depth. So there's other deities that Wiccans may honor. It just depends on what culture we're looking at, because they're, like I said, there's Greek, there's Celtic, Egyptian, Norse, Slavic, etc. So Wicca's pretty flexible, and it's also considered eclectic, which one of the pathways of paganism is called eclectic paganism, and that'll be one of the ones I go over. Some practitioners mainly focus on the god and the goddess, but other ones will include just a wide array of spirits and deities. So when it comes to me, because I am a Wiccan, definitely the horned god and the triple goddess are two that I recognize. As I get more into it and break down some of the deities in more depth, I may decide to add some more here and there as I start to study them a little bit more. So, but like I said, Wicca is less rigid about worship as some religions are. They don't have, one specific deity. They don't have one specific book of worship or anything like that. They're a little more flexible, and they're really focused on balance and cycles and connection to nature, as well as, like I said, the divine feminine, which is the triple goddess, and the masculine principles that come from the horned god. So when it comes to nature, Wicca does believe that nature is sacred. It's not just scenery. The Wiccans always celebrate the seasons. They celebrate the cycles of the moon. They celebrate birth, growth, and even decay. And they also celebrate renewal. They observe the 8 seasonal festivals called Sabbats. Those are part of the Wheel of the Year, which, like I said, we're going to go over in our next episode. Some of those festivals that we'll talk about are Samhain, Beltane, Yule, just to name a few. When it comes to magic in Wicca, it's not stage tricks. It's, which, I'm all about those stage tricks, but that's not what magic is when it comes to anything pagan related. So it's intentional energy work is what magic is when it comes to Wicca. So that will often include spell work, rituals, doing candle magic, which a lot of the daily enchantments I bring usually involve candles, also crystals, herbs, and then moon phases. And there are specific rituals you can do for moon phases, which is something I may include into our Moon Muse going forward. So basically the idea behind Wicca is that if you use a focused intention combined with symbolic action, that will influence outcomes. So it's not like this, I want to control the world or the universe type of magic. It's about being in harmony with the universe. So, when things manifest and we manifest things, we're not in control of the universe. We should be thanking the universe. We're working in harmony with it. And there are ethics, too, behind the Wiccan pathway. So there's some ethical guidelines. One of them is called the Wiccan Rede. And that says, "And it harm none, do what ye will." So that basically emphasizes just personal responsibility and avoiding harm to other living beings. And then there's also the concept of the threefold law. That is the belief that what you send out returns to you 3 times over. So some will interpret that literally, others see it more as like a karmic metaphor. I'm someone who definitely believes if you do bad to others, eventually the bad is going to come back to you. And if you do good for others, then you'll be repaid for it in good ways. So that's definitely how I see things. Like I said, Wicca does not have a central authority like a pope, like some religions do. They don't have a universal scripture like a Bible. So, and some people who practice Wicca will belong to covens, while some people practice alone, and those are called solitaries. So, I'm a solitary, I practice alone. When you join a coven, a lot of the times there are some rules, there are some requirements, things like that. I am the type of person who prefers to do things the way it feels right to me and the way it resonates with me. That is why I choose to be a solitary. So some traditions within Wicca, they do vary based on which pathway you go, because there are Alexandrian Wiccans, and then there's Wiccans from Gerald Gardner, and they're called I'll never be able to say this. Gardnerian Wiccans. So they're a little more formal and coven based, with initiations and things like that into the coven. And then the eclectic part of that would be to mix and match different parts of Wicca. That's more of a flexible approach. And then, like I said, solitary, they follow any path, but they basically practice, well, they do, they do practice alone. Like I said, I prefer to be a solitary. I like to make things kind of like my way and just the way that resonates with me and what feels right with my intuition. So when it comes to the afterlife for Wiccans, views on it kind of vary. Many of them do believe in reincarnation or like a spiritual realm, sometimes called the Summerland. But there isn't one mandatory belief when it comes to the afterlife. The afterlife and the different pathways of paganism is something I'm also going to get more broad about in an upcoming episode. So at its core, Wicca is mostly just about the reverence for nature, personal spiritual responsibility, honoring the cycles, practicing mindful magic, and living intentionally. So it's not about fear, it's about balance. They don't really look at it as about sins, they look at it as harmony. So that is Wicca. All right, moving on to the next one, Druidry. So Druidry is inspired by ancient Celtic practices. Also focuses on nature and the seasonal cycles and community, so a little similar there. It's a modern spiritual path. It was inspired by the ancient druids of the Celtic world, especially in places like Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. So originally, druids were actually priests, poets, judges, philosophers, and keepers of lore. They did not leave any written scriptures to be found, so everything that is known about Druidry and the history and its inspiration comes from archaeology, as well as some history from the Roman accounts. So modern Druidry is basically a revival movement, so it'll typically blend some historical inspiration, but also with some more modern practices. Some of their cores and beliefs, unlike Wicca, Druidry isn't really centered on a specific goddess or a god. It's very much about the relationship with nature. So trees, forests, also the elements, really. It's very focused about the relationship with the elements. So you've got trees, forests, land and waters, air and sky, the seasonal cycles, and also ancestors. So druids see spirits or consciousness woven through all things. So like by that I mean they don't look at as a rock as just a rock. A river isn't just a river. It has life, it has a spirit. I Okay, I'll be completely honest. I just started singing the song The Colors of the Wind in my head from Pocahontas because if you've ever seen the movie, in the part where she sings the song The Colors of the Wind, Pocahontas is my favorite Disney movie, I'm not even gonna lie. And I do know all the words to that song, but she actually sings about how trees and rocks and things, they have life and spirits. So that was a little side note there that just popped into my head. Anyway. So like Wiccans, many Druids do celebrate the same 8 Sabbats, and they do follow the Wheel of the Year. The focus in Druidry is very agricultural and land-based. So they really are about honoring things that are blooming, things that are ripening, and even things that are dying. So there are three. So modern Druidry often speaks of three paths. The first one is Bard, which is poetry, creativity, storytelling, and song. The next one is Ovate, and that is intuition, healing, and wisdom of nature. And then the last one is Druid, which is philosophy, leadership, and spiritual guidance. So, magic, when it comes to Druidry, some Druids do practice magic, others do not. It's not very spell centered the way Wicca can be. It often focuses more on meditation in nature. Tree lore is another thing. Connection with the ancestors, worshiping the environment, and then ritual storytelling. So the magic feels a little quieter. It's more not about lighting candles and doing rituals that way. It's more like standing barefoot in the grass, under a tree, and kind of just like listening to nature, worshiping nature, resonating with it, that sort of thing. Which standing barefoot outside is a very grounding technique. My girlfriend tries to get me to do it all the time, and I'm always like, no, I'm good. But something I'm gonna start. I think trying it actually is very good for you. So when it comes to the afterlife, some ancient sources would suggest that Druids believed in reincarnation. Modern Druids tend to vary. So some will believe in reincarnation and rebirth, some believe in what's called an otherworld, and then some kind of keep it open-ended where they don't necessarily believe one way or another. So there are some modern Druid organizations. One of those well-known groups is called the Order of Bards. And then there's the Ovates and also, again, just Druids. They're often structured by actual study courses, but there are many Druids do practice independently as solitaries. So Druidry, at its core, typically will ask things like, what does the land teach you? What story are you living inside you right now? How do you walk gently and powerfully at the same time? So that's basically the heart of Druidry. So the next one I want to talk about is heathenry, and heathenry has a smaller division to it, for lack of a better word, called Asatru. That's actually said with an accent, but I am not even going to attempt it because I know I'll do terrible at it. So heathenry / Asatru, we're going to get into next. So that basically revives Norse and Germanic traditions, often honoring gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya. Heathenry and Asatru, like I said, are related. They are not the same thing. So basically, all Asatru is heathenry. It's a part of heathenry, but not all heathenry is a part of Asatru. So you could kind of think of it that way. So starting with heathenry itself, like I said, it's a modern revival of a pre-Christian Germanic spiritual tradition, and it draws from cultures of like Scandinavia, Anglo-Saxon England, Iceland, and then also parts of the continental Northern Europe. It honors the gods found in Norse and Germanic myths. So that would include, like I mentioned, Odin, Thor, and Freya. There's a lot more to heathenry than just the gods, though. So one of the biggest cores of heathenry, one of their biggest core ideas is reciprocity. So that's a very big one. Heathenry is often built on a gifting cycle. So basically they believe you give to the gods or the ancestors and the land spirits, they give in return. So it's not really worshiping them. It's more like a relationship where you exchange things, offerings, and you honor them, and they will give in return. So one thing I also wanted to mention is that when you hear the word heathens, it's usually used in a much different term now. Just the way paganism, some of its symbols, some of its practices, and things like that have gotten a very bad rep for being satanic and just all around dangerous or bad. That's part of the reason why I do this podcast is because I'm giving people another perspective to look at and what it's really about, because that's all just fiction that's been made up. And so when you hear the word heathen, a lot of the times people would call somebody who's like uncivilized or has bad morals or just, does things, who's runs wild kind of out in society, basically a menace to society, or what society considers okay or considers normal. You would be like, oh, those heathens. I feel like that's something like an older adult might say about teenagers or something. They're all heathens, but that's not at all what heathenry actually is. So, another core idea within heathenry is that ancestors matter deeply. So, they will honor their family ancestors, also their cultural ancestors, and then even their spiritual forebears. So, they basically believe that the past is just not dead. And then the third core idea is called the web of weird. And yeah, it sounds like weird, but it's actually spelled WYRD. So that's a concept of fate or unfolding destiny. It basically is a way of saying, like, your choices matter and they have consequences, which is something we all kind of probably already know because every action has a consequence. The fourth core idea behind heathenry is honor and integrity. So they highly emphasize keeping oaths, taking personal responsibility. Um, your reputation is something they are. I don't even. I lost my words. Just having a good reputation is something that they care about. Also being courageous and being someone who is good with hospitality towards others. So it's really rooted in community, deeply rooted in community, and honoring ancestors and taking accountability as well. So within heathenry comes Asatru. So Asatru literally means faith in Azir. So that's the tribe of gods, which includes Odin and Thor. So it's a specific branch within heathenry. It focuses primarily on Norse sources. So Asatru is just only focused on Norse traditions and culture rather than any other ones. Well, heathenry incorporates some others as well. So Asatru tends to be, like I said, explicitly centered on Norse, including their deities. It is often organized in formal groups, and it's usually structured around ritual gatherings called bloats. Not bloats as in like I'm bloated. It's actually spelled like blots, but it's pronounced bloats, which are offerings. So some Asatru groups are called reconstructionists, meaning they try to basically rebuild practices as historically as possible. So heathenry is like another umbrella term under the umbrella term of paganism. Um, so, like I said, because with heathenry, it includes the Anglo-Saxons, continental Germanic, and Norse focus. It's just got a broader cultural framework, where Asatru just basically only focuses on Norse culture. An important thing to know is that there are extremist groups like in the Asatru. I'm not saying all people who follow Asatru at all, but there are some extremist groups that have tried to basically just make it so it's only about Norse cultures, which could be construed as them being racist. It could be racist. And historically, they would have been definitely more rigid with it all being about Norse tradition, and they would have had that racism be a lot stronger. Modernly, most people who practice Asatru reject racism and exclusion, and they are all about being inclusive. Some of the inclusive organizations are there's one called the Troth. So they promote anti-racist heathen practice. So they're very big on anti-racism, which is awesome. Racism, prejudice of all kinds is just something that I do not believe in and I do not stand for. So then I want to get into the last few within paganism. So there's a group of a few more called Hellenic, Kemetic, Slavic, and Eclectic. And I'm going to briefly go over those. So they draw from Greek, Egyptian, and Slavic myths, or they combine, multiple. So originally it was rooted in ancient Greek religion. For Hellenic paganism, we're going to talk about Hellenic paganism. Good grief. Hellenic paganism first. So that was rooted in ancient Greek religion. Their focus worships on Greek gods and goddesses like Zeus, Athena, Apollo. Right up my son's alley. He's very into Greek mythology. So this would probably be, if he was going to follow paganism, this would probably be his pathway. Some of their practices includes offerings, prayers, festivals that are aligned with the Greek calendar, and then sometimes reconstruction of rituals based on some historical texts or archaeology findings. They emphasize harmony along with fate, virtue, civic and personal honor, and then a connection to the mythological stories in Greek mythology. So then there's Kemetic paganism. This one is based on ancient Greek religion. So Kemetic is derived from the word Kemet, and that is actually the ancient name for Egypt. So focuses for their gods, they focus on gods like Ra, Isis, Osiris, Anubis, and Ma'at, which actually mostly stands for truth and balance. Some of their practices may include daily devotions, meditation, ritual offerings, magic, which is referred to as Heka in that pathway. They also believe in honoring the ancestors and living in alignment with Ma'at, which is what they consider their cosmic order. So they emphasize spiritual balance, moral integrity, and the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth. And then there is Slavic paganism. So Slavic paganism originated from pre-Christian beliefs of the Slavic people, which you're looking at Russia, Poland, Czech Republic, etc. The gods that they would focus on would be gods like Perun, which means thunder. I'm probably going to totally butcher these names. I apologize. Veles, which is underworld and wealth. Makash, which is fertility. And then also spirits of nature and their ancestors. Some of their practices include seasonal festivals, which are often tied to the solar or lunar calendar. Also offerings to spirits, rituals in forests or near the rivers. And then honoring of the ancestors and also folk magic. They like to emphasize connection to nature, community, and the cycles of the seasons. So then there is eclectic paganism. So eclectic paganism is actually not tied to any single historical religion. It draws from multiple sources. This is very common in modern paganism. A lot of modern pagans follow the eclectic pathway. So they will combine elements from the Greek, the Egyptian, the Slavic, the Celtic, the Norse, and other mythologies, as well as some modern magical practices. Their practices are very flexible. They could include meditation, spell work, ritual celebrations, things following things like the Sabbats, deity devotion, and then also some personal spiritual exercises. They like to emphasize personal connection and adaptability. The practitioner pretty much chooses what resonates spiritually and ethically with them, and they often blend traditions, and that's what they will emphasize. So, just to summarize a little bit, Hellenic, Kemetic, and Slavic paganism are all rooted in specific ancient cultures with those historical practices and the gods and the goddesses. Eclectic is a creative blend where you can mix your gods and goddesses, your myths, and your rituals from anywhere that basically fits your path. So like I said, many modern pagans will identify as eclectic because they have quite a mix. So core beliefs of paganism itself So there's reverence for nature and the cycles of life. So the sun, the moon, the seasons, and the elements. There's polytheism, which is honoring multiple deities, spirits, or ancestors. Personal responsibility and ethics. Many of them follow principles like harm none, especially like which I told you was a part of the Wiccan Rede, or some similar guidelines based on which pathway. The belief in magic, meaning energy, intention, and ritual are used to align with the natural world. And then the seasonal celebrations and following the year of the wheel. Or the year of the wheel. I meant the wheel of the year. I'm not going to go too deep into these because I actually am doing an entire episode about symbols in paganism. I'm just going to mention a few that you might see. Some you might see would be the pentacle, the pentagram, the triple moon, Ankh, which is connection to life and immortality. That's very common in Kemetic paths. And then also some runes, there's spirals, and there's some other cultural symbols that are used, especially for like divination, protection, representing different spiritual concepts and things like that. And just to name a few deities, like I said, I'm going to do an episode all about deities and get deep into them and the history behind those. But some of the common ones you might see if it's a Greek culture would be like Athena, Apollo, or Demeter. Norse, you would have Odin, Thor, or Freya. Celtic would be Brigid, Lu, or Cernunnos. And then Egyptian, you have Isis, Osiris, and Horus. There's obviously a lot more within all those cultures, but that's just to name a few. And then when it comes to lifestyles and practices, again, it depends on what pathway you follow, but many of them have their own rituals and ceremonies that are often tied to like lunar cycles or milestones in life, the Sabbats. A lot of them have either meditation, divination, spell work, or all three, or, just a variety of tools for connecting with nature, also ancestors, and setting your intentions. Some pagans actually follow certain dietary choices too. Some of them will follow seasonal diets. Some of them are completely vegetarian or vegan. Others will follow some earth conscious diets. And offerings of like food and drinks to deities is part of some of the rituals as well. So, and then also many pathways, they have some kind of altar or a sacred space. They don't, pagans don't have like a church like some religions do, but a lot of them will have altars or a sacred space where they can honor deities, do their meditation, their spell work, their rituals, honor nature, basically whatever they want to use it for. So that is a look into paganism and its history and some of the different pathways. I hope this helped you confirm what pathway you are or gave you some stuff to think about, so you can decide what pathway you want to follow. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for walking this journey with me. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave your feedback in the comments. I'd also love to hear about your experiences or answer any of your questions, so feel free to share those as well. Leave a rating on this podcast. It helps others to find my podcast. And don't forget to hit the share, follow, and subscribe button. You can check out the show notes for a recap on today's daily enchantment so that you can practice it in your own time and do it as well. I'm going to give it a try when I have a chance as well. And also, there is the Facebook page for Crystals, Cauldrons, and Conversations where you get updates on upcoming episodes. There is also now a group. So if you are a follower of the podcast and a listener and you want to join the group, it is called the Triple C Coven. So in the group, there's going to be more in-depth stuff where I give you different rituals, different information, and where you can also just be able to meet other people and talk to other people within the group about your practices, get more information, ask questions, and things like that. So that's the Triple C Coven group you can request to join if you are a follower of the podcast. And come sit around the cauldron with me next week when we dive into the Wheel of the Year and the 8 Sabbats. I'll be waiting to welcome you to the Coven, and as always, stay magical.